The grand ballroom of the Washington Heritage Hotel was filled with the sound of soft music and quiet conversations. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light. Men in expensive black suits walked around with glasses of champagne. Women in beautiful evening gowns laughed politely at jokes they had heard 100 times before. It was the annual Classical Music Foundation Gala, one of the most important events in the city. Every year, the richest and most powerful people came together to celebrate classical music. They donated millions of dollars to support young musicians and music education programs across the country. John Kennedy stood near the back of the room. He was not comfortable at events like this. He was a man who preferred simple things. He liked sitting on his porch back home, drinking sweet tea and listening to the birds sing. But tonight he had to be here. It was part of his job. John was not a musician. He was not rich. He was just a regular man from a small town who had worked hard his whole life. He had grown up in a modest house with loving parents who taught him the value of honesty and hard work. His father had been a factory worker. His mother had been a school teacher. They never had much money, but they always had love. As a boy, John had found an old piano in the back of his church. It was broken and out of tune. Most of the keys did not work properly, but young John had fallen in love with it anyway. He would sneak into the church after school and teach himself to play. He had no teacher. He had no music books. He just listened to songs on the radio and tried to copy them on the broken piano. His mother had noticed his love for music. She saved money for 2 years to buy him a small keyboard for his 12th birthday. John had cried when he opened the gift. He practiced every single day after that. He played before school. He played after school. He played until his fingers hurt and his eyes grew heavy with sleep. But life had other plans for John Kennedy. His father got sick when John was 16. The medical bills piled up like mountains of paper. John had to get a job to help his family. He worked at the local grocery store, stocking shelves and carrying bags for customers. He had less and less time for his music. Eventually, John had to make a choice. He could chase his dream of becoming a musician, or he could take care of his family. For John, there was no real choice at all. Family always came first. He put away his keyboard and focused on work and school. Years passed. John went to college. He studied hard and got good grades. He became successful in his career. He built a good life for himself, but he never forgot about music. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, he would sometimes sit at the old piano in his living room and play. The music helped him think. It helped him feel peace in a world that was often loud and confusing. Nobody knew about this part of John's life. He never told anyone. Music was his secret, his private joy. He was afraid that people would laugh at him. What would they say if they knew that a man like him played classical piano? They would probably think he was joking. They would probably not believe him. Tonight at the gala, John stood quietly and watched the crowd. A large stage had been set up at the front of the ballroom. A beautiful grand piano sat in the center of the stage. It was the most magnificent piano John had ever seen. It was black and shiny, like a mirror made of midnight. John felt his heart ache just looking at it. The host of the evening walked onto the stage. He was a tall man with silver hair and a confident smile. He welcomed everyone to the gala and thanked them for their generous donations. Then he introduced the special guest of the evening. "Ladies and," the host announced, "please welcome one of the greatest pianists of our time, the legendary maestro." The crowd erupted in applause. Everyone stood up from their seats to welcome the famous musician, walked onto the stage like a king entering his palace. He was a tall man with sharp features and cold blue eyes. His gray hair was slicked back perfectly. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Was known all over the world. He had performed in the greatest concert halls on every continent. He had won every major award in classical music. Critics called him a genius, fans him like a god, but was also known for something else. He was known for being cruel, believed that classical music was only for the elite. He thought that ordinary people could never understand or appreciate true art. He looked down on anyone who had not studied at the finest music schools. He had no patience for amateurs or self-taught musicians. To him, they were insects trying to fly with eagles. Sat down at the grand piano and played a short piece to warm up the crowd. His fingers moved across the keys like lightning. The music filled the room with beauty and power. When he finished, the audience applauded wildly, stood up and bowed. Then he looked out at the crowd with a small, cold smile. "Thank you," he said. "It is always a pleasure to play for people who truly appreciate the art of music. Classical music is not for everyone. It requires intelligence. It requires culture. It requires years of proper training." He paused and looked around the room. His eyes seemed to be searching for something. "I have heard," continued, "that some people believe anyone can play classical music. Some people think that talent can come from anywhere, that a farmer or a factory worker could sit at this piano and create beauty." The crowd laughed softly at the ridiculous idea, laughed too. "But we know the truth, do we not?" he said. "True music comes from true musicians. It cannot be faked. It cannot be learned from YouTube videos or library books. Either you have the gift or you do not." John felt his face grow hot. He knew was not talking about him specifically, did not even know he existed, but the words still hurt. John thought about his mother who had saved for 2 years to buy him that keyboard. He thought about all the nights he had practiced alone, teaching himself note by note. Was all of that worthless? Was he just pretending? A woman standing next to John whispered to her friend. "He is so brilliant," she said, "and so right. These days everyone thinks they are an artist. Everyone thinks they are special, but real talent is rare." John said nothing. He just stared at the stage and felt something burning inside his chest. It was not anger. It was something else. It was a feeling he had buried long ago, a feeling he had tried to forget. It was the feeling of wanting to prove himself, wanting to show the world what he could do. But that was foolish. He was nobody, was a legend. What could John possibly do? He decided to leave. This event was not for people like him. He turned to walk toward the exit, but as he turned, he bumped into someone. He looked up and found himself staring into the cold blue eyes of himself. The famous pianist had come down from the stage to greet some important donors, and now he was standing right in front of John Kennedy. "Excuse me," John said quietly. "I am sorry, I was not looking where I was going." Looked at John with a curious expression. He studied John's simple suit and plain tie. A small smile appeared on his lips. It was not a friendly smile. "And who might you be?" asked. His voice was smooth but sharp like a knife wrapped in silk. John took a deep breath. He had no idea that this moment would change his life forever. John Kennedy looked at the famous pianist standing before him. His cold blue eyes seemed to pierce right through him. John felt like a small animal being studied by a predator. "I am John," he said simply, "John Kennedy." Raised one eyebrow. "Kennedy, like the famous family. Are you related to royalty?" His voice dripped with mockery. "No, sir," John replied. "Just a regular Kennedy, nothing special about my family. We are simple people." Smile grew wider, but it never reached his eyes. "Simple people," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "How refreshing. Tell me, Simple John, what brings you to an event celebrating classical music? Do you even know what classical music is?" Several people nearby had stopped their conversations. They were watching the exchange with curious eyes. John felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I know a little bit about music," John said quietly. "I have always loved it." Laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made other people feel small. "You love it? How charming, let me guess. You listen to it in your car. Maybe you play it when you have dinner guests. You think that makes you a music lover?" "I play a little bit," John admitted. He did not know why he said it. The words just came out before he could stop them. The people around them went silent. Eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with amusement. "You play," he said. "You play what? The radio, the stereo." "The piano," John said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. He wished he had kept his mouth shut. He wished he had just walked out when he had the chance. Stared at him for a long moment. Then he burst into laughter. It was a loud, theatrical laugh that echoed through the ballroom. People from across the room turned to see what was so funny. "Did you hear that?" announced to the crowd. "This simple man says he plays the piano. Oh, this is wonderful. This is exactly what I was talking about in my speech. Everyone thinks they can play." More people gathered around them now. Some of them smiled awkwardly. Others looked uncomfortable. But nobody said anything to defend John. Nobody wanted to challenge the great. A woman in an expensive red dress stepped forward. She was one of his admirers, always following him to events and concerts. "Darling, be kind," she said. "I am sure the poor man just plunks around on a keyboard at home. There is no harm in that." "No harm," said, still smiling. "Perhaps not, but there is also no artistry. There is no skill. There is no beauty, just noise, just pretending." John felt something shift inside him. The embarrassment was still there, but something else was growing alongside it. It was a quiet anger deep in his chest. He had spent his whole life being told what he could not do. He had been told he was not smart enough, not rich enough, not good enough. He had learned to accept it. He had learned to stay quiet and stay small. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the way he looked at him, like he was nothing. Maybe it was the memory of his mother saving pennies to buy him that keyboard. Maybe it was all the nights he had practiced alone, pouring his heart into music that nobody ever heard. "I can play," John said again. His voice was stronger this time. "I taught myself. I have been playing for most of my life." Stopped laughing. He looked at John with new interest, like a cat that had found a mouse with unexpected courage. "You taught yourself," he said. "No conservatory, no private teachers, no formal training at all." "No, sir," John said. "Just me and a piano and a lot of practice." Shook his head slowly. "This is exactly the problem with the world today," he said to the crowd. "People think that practice is enough. They think that passion is enough, but it is not. Music is a sacred art. It takes more than just wanting to play. It takes discipline. It takes proper education. It takes being born with talent that cannot be taught." He turned back to John. "Let me give you some advice, simple John. Find a hobby that matches your abilities. Gardening, perhaps, or watching television. Leave the piano to those of us who were chosen to play it." The crowd laughed softly. Some people looked away, uncomfortable with the cruelty but unwilling to speak up. John stood alone in the middle of it all, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. A young waiter walked by with a tray of champagne. He caught John's eye and gave him a small, sympathetic smile. It was not much, but it was something. At least one person in this room saw him as a human being. Was not finished. He was enjoying himself too much to stop. "You know what? I have an idea," he announced. "Since our friend here believes he can play, why do we not give him a chance? Let us see what self-taught talent looks like." He gestured toward the grand piano on the stage. "There it is, simple John. The finest piano in the city. Go ahead, show us what you can do. Play something for us. Entertain us with your natural gift." John's heart began to pound. He looked at the piano, then back at. The crowd was watching him with a mixture of pity and curiosity. They expected him to make excuses. They expected him to back down and admit that he had been foolish. Part of John wanted to do exactly that. Part of him wanted to apologize, walk out of the ballroom, and never think about this night again. He could go home, sit on his porch, and forget that any of this had happened. But another part of him refused. That part was the 12-year-old boy who had cried when his mother gave him the keyboard. That part was the teenager who had practiced until his fingers bled. That part was the man who still played alone at night, creating beauty that nobody else ever heard. "Well," said impatiently, "are you going to play, or are you going to stand there like a frightened animal?" John took a deep breath. He thought about his father, who had always told him to stand up for what was right. He thought about his mother, who had believed in him when nobody else did. He thought about all the people in the world who were told they were not good enough, not special enough, not worthy of following their dreams. "Yes," John said quietly, "I will play." His eyebrows shot up. He clearly had not expected this answer. "Really?" he said. "You actually want to embarrass yourself in front of all these people?" "Maybe I will embarrass myself," John admitted. "Or maybe I will not, but either way I will try. That is all any of us can do." For a brief moment something flickered in his eyes. It might have been surprise, it might have been respect, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by the familiar cold amusement. "Very well," said. He stepped aside and gestured toward the stage. "The piano is waiting. Let us see what simple John can do." John began to walk toward the stage. His legs felt weak. His hands were shaking. He could hear whispers all around him. People were taking out their phones to record what they expected to be a disaster. The stage felt miles away. Each step was harder than the last, but John kept walking. He kept putting one foot in front of the other. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. When he reached the piano, he stopped and looked at it. Up close, it was even more beautiful than he had imagined. The black surface reflected the lights of the chandeliers. The white and black keys seemed to glow with an inner light. John sat down on the bench. It was made of soft leather and felt strange against his simple suit. He placed his hands on the keys but did not play yet. He just sat there, feeling the cool ivory beneath his fingertips. The ballroom went silent. Everyone was watching him. Stood at the front of the crowd, his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. He was waiting for John to fail. He was waiting to be proven right. John closed his eyes. He took one more deep breath, and then slowly he began to remember. He remembered the church with the broken piano. He remembered his mother's smile. He remembered all the music that lived inside him, waiting to be set free. He was ready. John Kennedy sat at the grand piano with his eyes closed. The ballroom was completely silent. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him, waiting for him to fail. He could sense smug satisfaction from across the room. But in that moment, John was not thinking about any of them. He was thinking about music. He was thinking about all the years he had spent playing alone, with nobody to hear him, with nobody to judge him. Those years had been lonely, but they had also been pure. He had played for the love of playing, nothing else. John opened his eyes and looked at the keys beneath his fingers. They were beautiful. They were perfect. And suddenly, he knew exactly what he would play. He began. The first notes were soft. They floated through the air like whispers. John was playing one of his favorite pieces, a sonata that he had taught himself years ago. He had heard it on the radio when he was a young man and had been so moved by it that he had spent months learning every note. At first, the crowd did not react. People looked at each other with confused expressions. They had expected noise. They had expected mistakes. They had expected to laugh. But what they heard was something else entirely. The music grew. John's fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace. He was not playing like someone who had been trained in a conservatory. He was playing like someone who had lived with music his whole life, who had breathed it and dreamed it and loved it more than anything else in the world. Smile began to fade. His arms, which had been crossed in amusement, slowly dropped to his sides. He stared at John with an expression that was impossible to read. The piece that John was playing told a story. It started quietly, like a sunrise over a peaceful valley. Then it grew more complex, more emotional. There were moments of joy and moments of sadness. There were parts that soared like birds and parts that fell like rain. John played with his whole body. His shoulders moved with the rhythm. His head swayed gently from side to side. He was not just hitting keys. He was creating something alive, something that could be felt in the heart. A woman in the front row put her hand over her mouth. Tears were forming in her eyes. The man next to her stood completely still, as if he was afraid that any movement would break the spell. The middle section of the sonata was the most difficult. It required the player to keep two different melodies going at the same time, one with each hand. Professional pianists trained for years to master this technique. Self-taught musicians almost never attempted it. But John had practiced this section 1,000 times in his living room. He had played it wrong hundreds of times before he played it right. And now, all that practice flowed through him like water through a river. His left hand and right hand moved independently, creating a sound so rich and full that it seemed impossible for one person to produce. Took a step backward. For the first time in many years, he did not know what to say. He had mocked this simple man. He had laughed at him in front of everyone. And now this same man was playing at a level that had rarely seen, even among professionals. The music continued to build. John was approaching the climax of the piece, the most powerful and emotional section. His fingers were moving faster now. The notes poured out of the piano like a waterfall of sound. People in the crowd were openly crying now. Some of them did not even know why. The music was touching something deep inside them, something that words could never reach. It was the magic of true art, the power of beauty to move the human soul. John's face was calm but intense. Sweat had formed on his forehead. His eyes were focused on some distant point that only he could see. He was not in the ballroom anymore. He was somewhere else, a place where only he and the music existed. The climax hit like a wave crashing on the shore. The notes were loud and triumphant, filling every corner of the grand ballroom. The chandeliers seemed to shake with the power of the sound. People felt the vibrations in their chests, in their bones. And then just as suddenly, the music became soft again. The storm had passed. What remained was gentle and sweet, like the sun coming out after rain. John played the final notes with tender care, letting each one fade completely before playing the next. The last note hung in the air for a long moment. Then it disappeared into silence. John lifted his hands from the keys. He sat very still, his head bowed, his eyes closed. He was afraid to look at the audience. He was afraid to see their reactions. For 3 full seconds, the ballroom was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Then the applause began. It started with one person, a young woman near the back who stood up and began clapping as hard as she could. Then another person joined her, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom had erupted into applause. People were standing up from their seats. They were cheering. They were shouting. Some of them were still crying. The sound of their appreciation was almost as loud as the music had been. John slowly opened his eyes and turned to look at the crowd. He could not believe what he was seeing. These were the same people who had laughed at him minutes ago. These were the same people who had expected him to fail. And now they were on their feet, applauding him like he was the greatest musician they had ever heard. The applause went on for a long time. People began to come up to the stage to shake John's hand. They told him that his playing had moved them. They told him that they had never heard anything so beautiful. They thanked him for sharing his gift. John did not know what to say. He just nodded and smiled, still in shock from what had just happened. He had come to this gala expecting nothing. He had never imagined that he would end up on stage, playing for the most important people in the city. Through the crowd, John saw. The famous pianist was standing exactly where he had been before, but everything about him had changed. His confident posture had crumbled. His smug expression had disappeared. He looked like a man who had just been proven completely wrong in front of everyone he knew. Their eyes met across the room. John did not feel angry at anymore. He did not feel the need to gloat or celebrate his victory. He just felt grateful. Grateful that he had found the courage to sit at that piano. Grateful that his years of practice had not been wasted. Grateful that, for one perfect night, the world had heard his music. Broke eye contact first. He turned and walked toward the exit, his head held high but his steps quick and purposeful. Some people tried to stop him and talk to him, but he ignored them. Within moments, he was gone. The host of the gala came onto the stage and put his arm around John's shoulder. "Ladies and," he announced, "I think we can all agree that we have witnessed something extraordinary tonight. Please give another round of applause for John Kennedy." The crowd cheered again. John waved awkwardly, not used to being the center of attention. All he had ever wanted was to play his music. He had never expected fame or praise. But as he looked out at the smiling faces before him, John realized that something important had happened. This was not just about him. This was about everyone who had ever been told they were not good enough. This was about everyone who had a dream but was too afraid to pursue it. This was about the power of believing in yourself, even when nobody else believes in you. John smiled. For the first time in a very long time, he felt truly proud of himself. The night was far from over. The morning after the gala, John Kennedy woke up to a world that had completely changed. His phone was ringing. It had been ringing for hours. He picked it up and saw that he had over 200 missed calls and thousands of text messages. At first, John thought something terrible had happened. He thought maybe there was an emergency with his family. But when he looked at his phone more closely, he saw that most of the messages were from strangers. "Amazing performance last night. I just saw the video. You are incredible. Please teach me how to play like you." John was confused. What video? What were these people talking about? He opened his social media account, which he rarely used, and nearly dropped his phone. His name was everywhere. Videos of his performance at the gala had been shared millions of times overnight. News websites were writing stories about him. Hashtags with his name were trending around the world. The headline on one major news site read, "Unknown man silences world-famous pianist with stunning performance." Another site called it the most beautiful moment of the year. A third site asked, "Who is John Kennedy and where did he learn to play like that?" John sat down on his bed, trying to process what was happening. He had lived a quiet life for so many years. He was used to being invisible, to moving through the world without anyone noticing him. And now, suddenly, the whole world wanted to know who he was. His phone rang again. This time it was a number he recognized. It was his old friend who worked at a local radio station. "John," shouted when John answered. "John, is that really you in that video? The guy playing piano at the gala?" "Yes," John said slowly, "that was me." "Brother, you never told me you could play like that. I have known you for 20 years and I had no idea. You are famous. Everyone is talking about you." John shook his head in disbelief. "I just played a song. I did not do anything special." "Did not do anything special?" laughed. "John, you made look like a fool. The guy has been acting like he is God's gift to music for decades, and you walked up to that piano and destroyed him, without even trying. The internet is going crazy. They love you." After hung up, John spent the next hour reading through the comments and messages. Most of them were positive. People were inspired by his story. They loved that he had taught himself to play. They loved that he had stood up to someone who tried to put him down. But some comments were negative. Some people said the video was fake. They said John must have had secret training. They said nobody could play that well without years of formal education. Himself had not made any public statements, but his fans were angry. They accused John of making their hero look bad. John put down his phone and walked to his living room. There, sitting in the corner, was his old piano. It was nothing like the grand piano at the gala. It was small and worn, with scratched wood and yellowed keys. But it was the piano that had taught him everything he knew. John sat down and began to play softly. Playing always helped him think. It helped him sort through his feelings and make sense of confusing situations. As he played, John thought about. He thought about the cold eyes and the cruel words. He thought about how easily had dismissed him, how quickly he had assumed that John was worth nothing. But John did not hate. He felt something closer to pity. Here was a man who had been given every advantage in life. He had studied at the finest schools. He had performed with the greatest orchestras. He had achieved fame and fortune beyond most people's dreams. And yet, he seemed deeply unhappy. He seemed to need to put others down just to feel good about himself. John understood that kind of insecurity. He had felt it himself many times. The difference was that John had learned to be content with who he was. He did not need to be better than anyone else. He just wanted to be the best version of himself. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. John stopped playing and went to answer it. Standing on his porch was a young woman with bright eyes and a professional camera bag over her shoulder. "Mr. Kennedy," she said with a wide smile, "my name is Sarah. I am a journalist with National Arts Magazine. Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" John hesitated. He was not used to talking to journalists. He was not used to being the center of attention. "I promise I will not take much of your time," Sarah continued. "People all over the world want to know your story. Where did you learn to play? How did you develop your talent? What made you decide to accept challenge?" John thought about it for a moment. Then he stepped aside and invited Sarah in. For the next 2 hours, Sarah asked questions and John answered them. He told her about the broken piano in the church. He told her about his mother saving money for the keyboard. He told her about giving up his dream to take care of his family and practicing alone late at night when nobody was watching. Sarah was moved by his story. She wrote notes quickly, her eyes growing wider as she learned more about his life. When John finished talking, she sat in silence for a moment, processing everything she had heard. "This is remarkable," she finally said. "You know, most people would have given up. They would have stopped playing forever. But you kept going. You kept practicing even when nobody cared, even when nobody was listening." John shrugged. "I did not do it for other people," he said. "I did it because I loved it, because the music was part of me. I could not stop playing any more than I could stop breathing." Sarah smiled. "That is exactly what makes your story so special, Mr. Kennedy. You are not playing for fame or money or recognition. You are playing because you have no choice, because the music demands to be played." After Sarah left, John received more visitors. Representatives from record labels came to his door, offering him contracts. Television producers wanted him to appear on their shows. Concert halls wanted to book him for performances. Universities wanted him to speak to their students. John listened to all of them politely, but he did not accept any offers right away. He was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He needed time to think. That evening, as the sun set over his quiet neighborhood, John sat on his porch and watched the sky turn orange and pink. His phone was still buzzing with notifications, but he had turned off the sound. He wanted a moment of peace. His neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs., walked over and sat down next to him. She had brought a plate of cookies, which she handed to him without saying anything. "Thank you," John said, taking a cookie. "I saw the video," Mrs. said. "Everyone in the neighborhood saw it. We always knew you were special, John. We just did not know how special." John laughed softly. "I am not special, Mrs. I am just a man who loves music." "Maybe that is what makes you special," she replied. "Loving something so much that you never give up on it. That is rare these days. Most people give up on their dreams as soon as things get hard." John thought about her words long after she had gone home. Was he special? He did not feel special. He just felt like himself, like the same person he had always been. But maybe that was enough. Maybe just being yourself and being true to what you loved was the most special thing of all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow the world would have more questions and more demands. But tonight, John was content to sit on his porch, eat cookies, and listen to the sounds of the evening. His life had changed forever, and yet in the most important ways it was exactly the same. 2 weeks had passed since the gala. The video of John Kennedy's performance had been watched over 50 million times. His name was known around the world, but through it all had remained silent. People wondered what the famous pianist was thinking. Some believed he was embarrassed and hiding from the public. Others thought he was angry and planning some kind of revenge. A few people said that was probably not bothered at all, that he was too important to care about a nobody like John Kennedy. But the truth was more complicated. Sat alone in his enormous apartment in New York City. The apartment took up the entire top floor of a luxury building. It had views of Central Park and was filled with expensive furniture and rare artwork. 3 grand pianos stood in different rooms. But was not enjoying any of these things. He was sitting in darkness, staring at a video on his laptop. It was the video of John playing at the gala. Had watched it over 100 times. Each time he watched it felt the same painful emotions. At first there was denial. This could not be real. This simple man could not play that well. There must be some trick, some editing, some explanation. But the more watched, the more he had to accept the truth. John Kennedy was genuinely talented. Not just talented, but exceptional. The way he played, the emotion he put into every note, the technical skill that should have taken decades to develop. It was all real. Had spent his entire life believing that talent was something you were born with. He believed that true musicians came from musical families, attended elite schools, and studied under famous teachers. He believed that without these advantages, it was impossible to achieve greatness. And yet here was John Kennedy, a man with no training, no connections, no advantages of any kind. A man who had taught himself to play on a broken piano in a church. And somehow, this man played with more heart and soul than had heard in years. Thought about his own career. He had started playing at the age of 4. His parents had hired the best teachers money could buy. He had practiced 8 hours a day for most of his childhood. He had sacrificed friendships, hobbies, and normal experiences to become the best. And he had become the best in some ways. His technical skill was nearly perfect. He could play the most difficult pieces without making a single mistake. Critics praised his precision and control. Audiences admired his confidence and stage presence. But somewhere along the way had lost something. He had become so focused on being perfect that he had forgotten why he started playing in the first place. He had forgotten the joy, the passion, the love of music that had first drawn him to the piano. Watching John play had reminded him of all that. John did not play to impress anyone. He did not play to prove how skilled he was. He played because the music was inside him and needed to come out. Every note he played was filled with genuine emotion. Closed his laptop and sat in the darkness for a long time. He was at a crossroads. He could ignore what had happened and continue living his life the same way he always had. He could dismiss John as a lucky amateur who had gotten one good performance. He could protect his ego and his reputation. Or he could do something that he had never done before. He could admit that he was wrong. The next morning's manager called him. "We need to talk about damage control. The media is killing you. Everyone is saying you were humiliated by that Kennedy guy. We need to put out a statement, something to make you look good." Was silent for a moment. Then he said, "No statement." "What do you mean, no statement? Your reputation is on the line." "Set up a press conference," said calmly. "I will speak to the media myself, tomorrow morning." His manager was confused but agreed to arrange it. The next day, stood in front of a room full of journalists and cameras. Everyone expected him to attack John Kennedy. Everyone expected him to make excuses or defend himself. Instead, did something that shocked the world. "I owe an apology," he began. His voice was quiet but steady. "2 weeks ago, I mocked a man named John Kennedy. I laughed at him in front of a crowd of people. I told him that he was not worthy of playing the piano because he had not been trained properly." The journalists leaned forward, surprised by this opening. "I was wrong," continued. "Completely and totally wrong. John Kennedy played that night with more heart and passion than I have heard in decades. He reminded me of something that I had forgotten. Music is not about perfection. It is not about technique or training or pedigree. It is about emotion. It is about connecting with something deeper than ourselves." Paused and took a breath. This was harder than any performance he had ever given. "I have spent my entire life believing that I was special because of my training. I looked down on people who did not have the same advantages that I had. I thought that made me better than them. But the truth is, John Kennedy is a better musician than I may ever be. Not because of his technical skill, but because of his heart." The room was completely silent. Nobody had expected this. "I would like to personally apologize to John Kennedy," said. "I hope that one day he will forgive me for my arrogance. And I hope that my story can serve as a lesson to others. Never judge someone by their background. Never assume that you know what someone is capable of. The human spirit has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." Finished his statement and walked off the stage without taking questions. The journalists sat in stunned silence for a moment, then erupted into chaos, shouting questions and typing furiously on their phones. Within hours, Sapology was headline news around the world. People were amazed that the arrogant pianist had humbled himself so completely. Some thought it was a publicity stunt. Others believed it was genuine. But everyone agreed that it was unexpected. John Kennedy watched the press conference from his living room. When apologized, John felt tears forming in his eyes. He had not expected this. He had not asked for this. All he had done was play a song. But maybe that was enough. Maybe music had the power to change people, to open their hearts, to make them see the world differently. John sat down at his old piano and played a quiet song. It was a song his mother used to hum when she was cooking dinner. As he played, he thought about and wondered if the famous pianist had finally found what he had been missing all along. Maybe it was not too late for either of them. 3 days after his public apology, John Kennedy received a letter. It was not an email or a text message. It was an actual paper letter, written by hand in elegant handwriting. The envelope was made of expensive cream-colored paper, and the return address was in New York City. John opened the letter carefully and began to read. "Dear Mr. Kennedy," the letter began. "I know that words on paper cannot undo the harm I caused you at the gala, but I felt compelled to write to you personally, beyond what I said at the press conference. I have watched your performance at least 100 times now. Each time I discover something new to admire. Your phrasing in the second movement, your dynamics in the final section, the way you breathed with the music, as if you and the piano were one being." John sat down in his favorite chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. "I have performed in every major concert hall in the world," the letter continued. "I have played for presidents and kings. I have won every award that exists in classical music. And yet, watching you play, I felt something I have not felt in years. I felt jealous, not of your fame or your success because those things came later. I felt jealous of your joy, the pure, simple joy of making music. I realized that I had lost that joy somewhere along the way. I became so focused on being the best that I forgot why I started playing in the first place." The letter went on for several pages. Wrote about his childhood, about the pressure he had felt to be perfect, about the loneliness of a life spent chasing success. He wrote about watching John's video and feeling something break inside him, something that had been frozen for a very long time. At the end of the letter made a request. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," he wrote, "but if you are willing, I would like to meet you. Not for cameras or publicity, just two musicians talking. "I believe I have much to learn from you if you are willing to teach me. Your humble student." John read the letter 3 times. He was not sure what to think. Part of him was still hurt by what had said at the gala. The public apology had helped, but the memory of that humiliation was still fresh. But another part of John felt compassion for. He could see past the arrogance now. He could see a man who had been shaped by pressure and expectations, who had lost his way but was trying to find it again. John decided to accept the invitation. 1 week later, John flew to New York City. It was his first time on an airplane in many years. The city overwhelmed him with its size and noise and constant movement. People rushed everywhere, staring at their phones, barely noticing the world around them. Had arranged for a car to pick John up from the airport. The driver took him through the busy streets of Manhattan to a beautiful building overlooking Central Park. An elevator carried John to the top floor, where his apartment took up the entire level. Himself opened the door. He looked different from how he had looked at the gala. His hair was slightly messy. He was wearing simple clothes instead of an expensive suit. His cold blue eyes seemed warmer now, more human. "Mr. Kennedy," said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming." "Please call me John," John replied, shaking his hand. Led John into the apartment. It was enormous and filled with beautiful things, but what caught John's attention were the pianos. There were 3 of them, each more magnificent than the one at the gala. "Would you like something to drink?" asked. "Coffee, tea, something stronger." "Just water, thank you," John said. They sat in a comfortable living room with windows that showed the entire city spread out below them. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. They just sat in awkward silence, 2 strangers trying to find common ground. Finally broke the silence. "I want you to know that my apology was genuine," he said. "I know some people think it was just for publicity, but it was not. Watching you play changed something in me. I cannot explain it fully, but it is true." John nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said, "and I appreciate you saying it." "Can I ask you something?" Leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Of course." "How do you do it? How do you play with such emotion? I have trained for decades. I have practiced every day of my life, but I cannot play the way you play. I cannot make people feel the things you made them feel. What is your secret?" John thought about the question for a long time before answering. "I do not think there is a secret," he finally said. "I think the difference is that when I play, I am not thinking about playing. I'm not thinking about the notes or the technique or what the audience might think. I am just feeling. I am feeling whatever the music wants me to feel, and I am letting that feeling come out through my fingers." Looked frustrated. "But how do you do that? How do you stop thinking and just feel?" "I am not sure," John admitted. "Maybe it is because nobody ever taught me the rules. I did not learn that there was a right way and a wrong way to play. I just played however felt natural, and maybe that freed me from the pressure that you talk about." Sat back in his chair, processing this information. "So you are saying that all my training, all my education, might actually have hurt me, that knowing all the rules made me forget how to break them." "I am not saying your training was bad," John said carefully. "You are an incredible pianist. Your technique is perfect, but maybe technique is not everything. Maybe the heart matters too, and maybe, somewhere along the way, your heart got buried under all that technique." Was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to one of the grand pianos. He sat down on the bench and placed his hands on the keys. "Will you teach me?" he asked. "Will you teach me how to play with my heart again?" John walked over and stood beside the piano. "I am not a teacher," he said. "I have never taught anyone anything." "Neither have I learned anything from teachers," replied with a small smile. "We would be starting from the same place." John looked at the piano, then he thought about how strange life could be. A few weeks ago, this man had mocked him in front of hundreds of people. And now here he was, asking for help, humbling himself in a way that must have been incredibly difficult. "All right," John said, "I will try, but I cannot promise anything." Nodded gratefully. Then he began to play, and John listened, and slowly, carefully, they began to find their way toward something new. Outside the window, the sun was setting over New York City, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And somewhere in that huge, busy city, two very different men were discovering that they had more in common than either of them had ever imagined. John Kennedy stayed in New York for 2 weeks. Every day, he would meet at his apartment and spend hours at the piano. But these were not normal music lessons. They were something else entirely. Would play a piece perfectly, hitting every note with precision and control. Then John would play the same piece his own way, letting the music flow through him without thinking too much about technique. "You see," John would say, "you are playing the notes, I am playing the feeling. The notes are the same, but the feeling is different." At first, struggled to understand. He had spent so many years focusing on perfection that he did not know how to let go. Every time he tried to play with emotion, he would catch himself analyzing his own performance. His brain would not stop working. "You are thinking too much," John would tell him. "Close your eyes, forget about the audience, forget about being perfect. Just remember why you fell in love with music in the first place." One afternoon, closed his eyes and thought about his childhood. He thought about the first time he had heard a piano playing on the radio. He had been 5 years old, sitting in his grandmother's kitchen. The music had filled him with wonder. He had known in that moment that he wanted to make sounds like that. With his eyes still closed, began to play. He played a simple melody, something from his childhood. He did not think about technique. He just remembered that little boy in his grandmother's kitchen, the one who had loved music before he knew anything about being great. When he finished, opened his eyes. John was smiling at him. "That was beautiful," John said. "That was real." Looked down at his hands, confused. "But I made mistakes. The rhythm was not perfect. The dynamics were inconsistent." "Who cares about perfection?" John asked. "Did you feel something when you played?" "Thought about it?" "Yes," he admitted. "I felt. I do not know how to describe it. I felt like myself. The real me, not the famous pianist, but just the boy who loved music." "That is all that matters," John said. "The mistakes will work themselves out. But the feeling, the heart, that is what people remember. That is what moves them." Over the following days, began to change. He practiced playing with his eyes closed. He practiced forgetting about the audience. He practiced connecting with the child inside him who had first fallen in love with the piano. It was not easy. Years of training had created habits that were hard to break. Sometimes would get frustrated and want to give up. But John was patient with him. He understood that change took time. "You did not become a perfect technician overnight," John reminded him. "You will not become a heartfelt musician overnight either. Give yourself time. Give yourself grace." News of their partnership spread through the music world. People were fascinated by the strange friendship between the famous classical pianist and the self-taught amateur. Some critics said was wasting his time. Others said he was having a midlife crisis. But a growing number of people were intrigued. They wanted to see what would happen when technical perfection met emotional authenticity. John, meanwhile, was learning things too. Taught him about music theory, about the history of the pieces he played, about techniques he had never known existed. John discovered that some of the things he did naturally had names and explanations. He discovered that his instincts were aligned with principles that musicians had developed over centuries. "You have natural talent," told him one day. "Talent that cannot be taught, but talent alone is not enough. With some formal knowledge, you could become one of the greatest pianists alive." John laughed. "I am too old to become anything great," he said. "I am happy just being myself." But shook his head. "You are never too old," he said, "and you are already great. The world just did not know it until now." As the 2 weeks came to an end, John began to miss his home. He missed his old piano with the scratched wood. He missed his porch and his neighborhood and Mrs. Cookies. New York was exciting, but it was not where he belonged. On his last night in the city, took John to a famous jazz club in Greenwich Village. They sat in a dark corner, listening to a young pianist play improvisations that seemed to come from another world. "This is what I love about music," John said, watching the pianist. "It does not matter if you are playing classical or jazz or rock and roll. If you play with your heart, people will feel it." Nodded. "I understand that now," he said. "I understand what I was missing all those years. I was so focused on being better than everyone else that I forgot about connecting with them." "Competition has its place," John said, "but music is not about winning. It is about sharing. It is about taking something inside of you and giving it to others." They sat in silence for a while, enjoying the music, then spoke again. "I want to do something," he said. "Something to thank you for everything you have taught me, and something to show the world that music can bring people together, even people who seem very different." "What do you have in mind?" John asked. Smiled. "A concert. A special concert with both of us playing. I will play my way and you will play your way, and together we will show people what music can really be." John thought about it. The idea was scary. He had only performed in public once at the gala. The thought of performing at a real concert, with tickets and audiences and cameras, was overwhelming. But then he thought about his mother, who had believed in him when nobody else did. He thought about all the people who had watched his video and sent him messages saying that his playing had inspired them. He thought about the power of music to change lives and open hearts. "All right," John said finally, "let us do it." Raised his glass of water in a toast. "To music," he said, "and to friendship." "To music and friendship," John agreed. Outside the jazz club, the city of New York hummed with life. Somewhere in that vast ocean of buildings and people, a remarkable concert was beginning to take shape. A concert that would change the world of classical music forever. But that was still in the future. For now, two friends sat in a dark club, listening to jazz and dreaming of possibilities. 6 months had passed since John Kennedy had first met in that New York apartment. 6 months of planning, practicing, and preparing for the biggest night of both their lives. The concert was called Two Paths, One Music. It would take place at Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world. Tickets had sold out within 3 minutes of going on sale. Millions more would watch the live stream from their homes. The day of the concert, John woke up in his hotel room feeling nervous. His hands were shaking. His stomach was turning. He had never experienced anything like this before. There was a knock at his door. It was looking surprisingly calm. "How are you feeling?" asked. "Terrified," John admitted. Smiled. "Good, that means you care. If you were not nervous, I would be worried." They walked together to Carnegie Hall. Even though the concert would not start until evening, they wanted to see the stage, to feel the space, to make it familiar. The hall was empty and silent. Thousands of red velvet seats stretched up toward the high ceiling. The stage held 2 grand pianos positioned to face each other. The acoustics were legendary. Even the softest whisper could be heard in the farthest seat. John walked to the center of the stage and looked out at the empty seats. In a few hours, every one of those seats would be filled with people waiting to hear him play. The thought was overwhelming. "You know what I thought when I first saw you at the gala?" asked, joining him on stage. "That I was a fool who did not belong there," John guessed. Shook his head. "No, I thought you looked peaceful. Everyone else was trying so hard to fit in, to be impressive, to be noticed. But you were just standing there, looking at the piano, completely at ease with yourself. I think that is why I targeted you. I was jealous of your peace." John was surprised by this confession. "I did not feel peaceful," he said. "I felt out of place. I felt like everyone knew I did not belong there." "Perhaps that is the secret," said. You felt out of place, but you did not let it change who you were. You stayed true to yourself. That takes more courage than most people have. They practiced for several hours, running through their pieces, adjusting timing, working out transitions. Then they went back to the hotel to rest before the big night. At 7 o'clock in the evening, John stood backstage in a simple black suit. He could hear the audience taking their seats, thousands of people buzzing with anticipation. Television cameras were being positioned. Journalists were preparing their coverage. Appeared beside him, wearing his own perfectly tailored suit. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," John said honestly, "but I am going to do it anyway." Laughed, "That is the spirit." The lights in the hall dimmed. A voice announced the beginning of the concert. The audience fell silent. Walked onto the stage first. The applause was enormous, a wall of sound that seemed to shake the building. He bowed gracefully and took his seat at one of the grand pianos. Then John walked out. The applause for him was even louder. People were standing, cheering, shouting his name. John blinked in the bright lights, overwhelmed by the response. He waved awkwardly and made his way to the second piano. When the noise finally died down, spoke into a microphone. "Ladies, and thank you for being here tonight. What you are about to witness is unlike any concert you have seen before. John and I come from very different worlds. I was trained in conservatories. He taught himself on a broken church piano. I have performed for royalty. He performed for the first time at a charity gala. But despite all our differences, we discovered something important. Music is bigger than any one path. Music belongs to everyone." Paused and looked over at John. "Tonight, we will play together and separately. We will show you two ways of approaching the same art, and we hope that by the end, you will understand what we have come to understand, that there is no right way to make music. There is only true music and false music, and true music comes from the heart." They began to play. The first piece was a classical sonata. Played his part with perfect precision, hitting every note exactly as the composer had intended. Then John played the same piece his way, adding subtle variations, letting his emotions guide his interpretation. The audience listened in wonder. They could hear the difference between the two approaches, but they could also hear the beauty in both. His version was like a perfect diamond, brilliant and flawless. John's version was like a flower garden, wild and colorful and full of life. As the concert continued, something magical began to happen, started to loosen up. His playing became less rigid, more free. John noticed and smiled. The lessons they had shared were working. For their final piece, and John played together. They had composed something new, a piece that combined John's emotional approach with technical skill. They had called it Two Paths. The music started softly, with John playing a simple melody while added complex harmonies beneath it. Slowly, the two parts began to weave together, becoming something greater than either one alone. The audience was completely still. Some people were crying. Others had their eyes closed, lost in the music. The sound filled every corner of the great hall, rising up to the ceiling and spreading out like wings. As the piece reached its climax, John and played as one. Their fingers moved in perfect synchronization. Their breathing matched. In that moment, they were not two separate musicians. They were one artist with four hands. The final notes rang out and faded into silence. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the audience erupted. They stood on their feet. They cheered and clapped and shouted. The noise was incredible, a wave of appreciation that went on and on without stopping. John and stood and bowed together. Tears were streaming down John's face. He thought about his mother, who had saved for 2 years to buy him that keyboard. He thought about his father, who had taught him the value of hard work. He thought about all the nights he had played alone, wondering if his music would ever be heard. Now it had been heard. Now the whole world was listening. After the concert, reporters asked what he had learned from John. He answered simply, "I learned that perfection is not the same as beauty, and I learned that the heart knows things the mind cannot understand. They asked John what he had learned from. He said, I learned that there is always more to discover. No matter how long you have been doing something, there is always room to grow. The concert was called a triumph by every critic who reviewed it. Sales of classical music albums increased by 30% in the following year. Music schools around the world began to change their teaching methods, placing more emphasis on emotional expression alongside technical training. But for John Kennedy, the most important thing was not the fame or the praise. It was the knowledge that he had stayed true to himself. He had faced his fear and overcome it. He had silenced the voices that said he was not good enough. 1 month after the concert, John was back home on his porch, drinking sweet tea and watching the sunset. His old piano sat in the living room, waiting for him. Mrs. had brought over another plate of cookies. Life had changed in many ways, but in the most important ways, it was exactly the same. John was still a simple man who loved music. He was still a boy who had found a broken piano in a church and taught himself to play. The world now knew his name, but John knew something more important. He knew his heart, and that was all that really mattered. He finished his tea, walked inside, and sat down at his piano. As his fingers touched the keys, the music began to flow, and somewhere far away, the world stopped to listen.